Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. This week and next, I want to get to a long overdue follow-up on some of the great comments that have come into the channel over the last couple of months. Even with 2 episodes, we'll really only be able to scratch the surface. If I don't get to your comment, please don't think that it wasn't appreciated. I'm really enjoying the great insights and info that are coming into the channel. Please keep it coming. So let's get started right away. On episode 171 with David Beard and Giggins, John Hammond theorized that the Get You Back single could have been huge if the Beach Boys had included it in their set at Live Aid in the summer of 1985. John's comments got me looking closer at the timing. On the chart published on July 13, 1985, the day of the Live Aid concerts, Get You Back was at number 27. It had been at number 26, which ended up being its US chart peak for the 2 weeks prior. The timing would have been just about perfect. You'd think they would have found a place for it among their usual greatest hits set. More people would have heard the single there, I'm sure, than in all the other airplay it was getting. At the very least, it would have shown aspirations to be part of the current music scene instead of an oldies act. Now that John mentions it, it kind of makes you wonder what the point of making a new album was in the first place if they were just going to immediately go back to playing the oldies. Maybe they were worried the crowd would start yelling requests for Barbara Ann if they played Get You Back? Or maybe they thought the entire crowd of 90,000 would immediately head for the restrooms? In any case, leaving the new single out of their set at Live Aid does seem like another in a long line of inexplicable missed opportunities for the band. Also commenting on episode 171, Jim Murphy pointed out via Facebook that California Calling was released as a single in Japan and also apparently in Australia. Additionally, he let us know that Passing Friend was released as a single in the UK. All these releases had the same B-side. Once again, rather than anything from the new album, they went with the same B-side as It's Getting Late in the US, using the 9-year-old It's Okay from 15 Big Ones. Clearly, somebody was dead set that that should be a B-side in 1985. Passing Friend was also released as a 12-inch in the UK, adding Sumahama and Good Timing from the Light album, which were only 6 years old at the time. Those are really interesting releases, and thanks for letting us know about them, Jim. Back in episode 156, Cool Stuff I Found Out Part 16, following up on our discussion of Carl and the Passions, I asked if anybody could think of any other established acts that had released records under pseudonyms. I had thought of a few of them, including the Four Seasons as the Wonder Who and Bob Dylan as Blind Boy Grunt on Broadside Ballads Volume 1. Dr. Insomnia hit on Sgt. Pepper, which I had somehow omitted. Colin Walton came up with the Mothers of Invention as Reuben and the Jets from 1968. Ron Saunders came up with the earliest one anybody mentioned, Hank Williams as Luke the Drifter. Skip 44 mentioned the Turtles Battle of the Bands album, on which the group assumed a different persona for each track. Jeff McDaniel thought of both Hank Wilson's Back Volume 1 by Leon Russell from 1973 and Garth Brooks as Chris Gaines from 1999. Smearington Weeps thought of The Damned as Naz Nomad and the Nightmares from 1984. Beanie came up with Bobby Bare credited as Bill Parsons on the 1959 hit The All-American Boy, which is a weird one since there was actually a performer named Bill Parsons. It's just not him on the record. Reportedly, Parsons even lip-synced to Bobby Bare's performance on television. That's an interesting one and could open up a whole other category of records done by performers other than those listed on the label. I know there's a long tradition of that, predating and even post-dating Milli Vanilli. Michael Leva came up with Warren Zevon and 3/4 of REM as the Hindu Love Gods from 1990, and Marco Falzone came up with U2 and Eno as Passengers from 1995. A couple of good ones, both of which seem a little closer to the Derek and the Dominoes model of established artists recording in a new group under a new name. Battle of Trenton thought of McCartney recording as the Fireman and came up with one I never would have thought of in a million years, the Folksman being another name for Spinal Tap. Now this is a weird one because of course it's actors playing characters in a band in Spinal Tap, and then it's those same actors playing different characters in a different band in A Mighty Wind, But since they're actually performing the music in both cases, I think it's fair to call the Folksmen Spinal Tap under another name, even if they are minus drummer R.J. Parnell and our old friend keyboardist Dave Caffinetti, who has figured in so many unique ways and episodes over the years here. I know that's far from a complete listing. There's also Elvis Costello and XTC under various pseudonyms. McCartney and Wings is the Country Hams. Roxy Music is the Dumbbells. I'm sure there are many others. But thanks everybody for those responses. There are some really clever ones there and some that I never would have thought of in a million years. Also talking about Carl and the Passions, I had mentioned Hold On Dear Brother as an early example of country influence on a Beach Boys record. Since then, Robert Zastro pointed out that Cotton Fields also had a country flavor, and recently, Michael Lukens pointed out that the first countrified song is Long Tall Texan from the Beach Boys concert album. Good call. Thanks for thinking of that. We talked about Beach Boy odd tracks of the 2010s in episodes 156 and 157. Frank Allison let me know about a recording called We Are the World 25 for Haiti, which was released on February 12, 2010, and featured Al Jardine and Brian Wilson among the 80-plus guest artists. It was a re-recording of the 1985 We Are the World song with partially rewritten lyrics for the benefit of victims of the 7.0 magnitude earthquake which devastated Haiti on January 12, 2010, 1 month earlier. You can catch some glimpses of Brian and Alan in the video. Though everyone agreed it was well-intentioned, the re-recorded song was widely panned. Typical of 2010, a lot of the vocals were auto-tuned. It featured a rap segment, and in the words of critic Chris Richards of the Washington Post, the entire recording was horribly oversung. If you ask me, all that's pretty typical of a lot of records in 2010. I didn't mind the rap so much, but the auto-tune and the bust-a-gut singing really put me off. Additionally, the recording and the video were criticized for prominently featuring some Z-lister talent. There were some big-name artists there, but I'm sure the most frequently asked question about the video is, who was that? Again, I'd put at least some of that down to the times. By 2010, the music industry was far more fragmented. A big-name artist in 2010 did not have anywhere near the recognition that a big-name artist would have had in 1985. And of course, just like with a movie, you usually don't get the big names turning up for the remake. Anyway, Brian and Al were there and feature in the chorus, though I think you have zero chance of hearing them among the 80-plus singers, some of whom are wailing like they've just been thrown out of an airplane without a parachute. On February 27th, Saturday Night Live featured a dead-on parody of the project, beginning with Kenan Thompson as Quincy Jones saying, "Recently, the music world came together to record We Are the World 2, a song to raise awareness of the Haitian earthquake disaster. Sadly, the song itself was a disaster. So they were unveiling We Are the World 3, raising awareness of the We Are the World 2 disaster." Ironically, Al Jardine is much better featured in the parody, where he's shown as Jenny Slate as Lady Gaga sings, "But tell me, who is this weird dude and in the front row?" With all respect to Al, he does seem to have oddly prominent placement. It looks like they put him in front with Brian, but somewhere along the line, Brian moved further and further toward the back. Either that, or they just arranged everybody by height, like a middle school class photo. Anyway, the same day the parody aired on Saturday Night Live, the actual single reached number 2 on the chart, so it undoubtedly did its job of raising money for Haitian earthquake relief. Thanks for mentioning that, Frank. In episode 167 about the Shutdown Volume 2 album, Fabrizio Castro mentioned their interview on American Bandstand in early 1964, in which Al tells Dick Clark the name of the new album is Fun, Fun, Fun. The rest of the group correct him, and Brian tells Dick Clark it's called Shutdown Volume 2. I always figured that Al thought he'd been asked about the new single, but Fabrizio's comment made me wonder if Fun, Fun, Fun had been considered for the album title, and Al was referring back to that. In that same episode, we talked about the genesis of Fun, Fun, Fun coming from a visit that the group made to Salt Lake City radio station KNAK. KNAK had been early boosters of the Beach Boys, and of course the group loved and appreciated Salt Lake City in general, and KNAK in particular, as one of the first places that they found real success and popularity outside of California. Larry Jacobs, who goes by WA7ZBO here on YouTube, recently shared this image of the special Beach Boys Salt Lake City promo single from 1965. Larry has a long history with Salt Lake City radio and worked at KNAK. He tells me that he originally had 3 copies of the single that he got from the radio station. He's down to 1 now, but it appears to be in primo condition. He also shared this press clipping which gives some context to the record. It's a very cool item, Larry, and thanks for sharing it. Talking about the B-side of Fun, 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 Why Do Fools Fall in Love, in episode 168, I mentioned the alternate version with the long piano intro that was released on the Summer Love Songs compilation in 2009. Go With The Flow mentioned that the single and album versions are also different. The album version opens with a drum beat that is absent on the single version. After reading the comment, I went back to the source. Go With The Flow is right, of course. I'd also say that on the single version, I think I can hear just a bit of a stray note of the unused piano opening just as the track begins. It made me wonder if the drum beat had been added for the album not only to give it a punchier opening, but also maybe to cover that little residual bit of piano. Going back to the version released in 2009, it has the piano intro and the drum beat, so who knows? Anyway, thanks for pointing that out, Go With The Flow, really appreciate it. Betamax Blocker recalled an interview in which Bruce Johnston said he thought Why Do Fools Fall in Love would have been a big charting single if it had been released as an A-side. As Betamax points out, that's well before Bruce joined the group, of course. One of the things I like about Bruce are his candid and interesting opinions on the work that he and others produced. It's one of the reasons I wish he would reconsider his decision not to write a memoir. In episode 168, I also talked about Mike Love's sax solo on Shutdown as having been a one-note sax solo, and I know I've seen it referred to as a one-note solo in other places. Thomas Watson pointed out that it is actually a two-note solo, and listening to it, yes, it does sound like 2 notes. For clarification, I reached out to an old friend of mine who also happens to have the last name Watson. Don Watson was part of that original group of friends that I started listening to the Beach Boys with back in high school. He's also a talented musician, a saxophone player, and the winner of the John Philip Sousa Award. Don elaborated, quote, "There are 2 notes in the solo. I think people think it's a one-note solo because he plays 1 note for 2 measures, then another note for 2 measures, then goes back to the original note for 2 measures. Don concludes his comments with, he's quite a musician. So it is a 2-note solo, not a 1-note solo. As I said to Thomas, that means that Mike Love is at least twice the saxophone player that I thought he was. Thanks to both Thomas and Don for that. I recently returned from a family vacation to Montreal and Toronto, and I wanted to thank Joel Goldenberg for his recommendations on used record stores in Montreal. I got to check out Cheap Thrills, which also has a nice selection of used books, and I was particularly impressed with Beatnik Records, which has a large selection, including probably 4 or 5 bins devoted exclusively to obscure Beatle releases. You've got a beautiful city there, Joel, and if I could pass along just one observation, it was like 47 degrees while we were there, which is like 8 or 9 Celsius, and people were eating at outdoor restaurants and walking around in shorts and t-shirts. People in Michigan think they are pretty acclimatized to cold weather, but we've got nothing on the people of Montreal. You are one tough bunch when it comes to cold weather. Anyway, we had a great time, and thanks again for the recommendations, Joel. Really appreciate it. I also wanted to thank Chris Rainbow, who, along with John Hammond and some others, always provides a great UK perspective in the comment section on the episodes. I realized how much I had learned about UK pop culture from Chris recently when I was reading The McCartney Legacy. When it came to the year 1972, I already knew about everything from the coal miners' strike and nationwide blackouts to Chicory Tip's hit single, Son of My Father. I wouldn't have known anything about those things 1 or 2 years ago. Thanks for the comments and for the education, Chris. By the way, if you are interested in an account of McCartney's solo career, this is the best one that I've seen. It's only the first part of a multi-volume set. This one covers 1969 to 1973, so basically from the split with the Beatles to Band on the Run. It's a far more nuanced, detailed, and complex look at McCartney and that period than I've ever seen, and one thing that I really love is that it also includes recording session info with dates. I'll admit I was a bit loath to spend more money on yet another Beatle book, but this one was really worth it, and I am certainly looking forward to Volume 2. On episode 167 in the comments, Ron Saunders wrote that he got seriously interested in the Beach Boys after hearing Where Have All the Flowers Gone, followed by The Warmth of the Sun on a radio station in Anchorage, Alaska in the early 90s. He said he knew both songs already, but the combination he found very affecting, and I can certainly imagine that. That leads me to pose the question, are there songs by other artists that you like to use, particularly in a mix with a Beach Boys song? For example, is there a song from an artist that you like to precede a Beach Boys song with, and one that you like to follow it with? I'll give you one example that I really like is I like to start with the title track from Joni Mitchell's Hissing of Summer Lawns and follow it with Busy Doing Nothing. They're both very different takes on being housebound on an uncomfortably warm day in Los Angeles, but I think they complement each other really well. And the trumpets, saxophone, and flute on Hissing of Summer Lawns I think goes well with the oboe and clarinets on Busy Doing Nothing. And then following Busy Doing Nothing, I like to use Tom Jones' It's Not Unusual. The styles complement each other nicely, especially with the horn section on It's Not Unusual, and the wildly upbeat Tom Jones record offers a nice change of pace after the Joni Mitchell and Beach Boy tracks. So what are your favorite tracks by other artists to precede and to follow any given Beach Boys group or solo recording? I'd love to know what you come up with. I also wanted to thank Chris McGovern for having me back on Chris's podcast, The Gen X Muse. If you get a chance, check it out. Chris has a lot of really interesting guests on that podcast. Again, it's Gen X Muse. One of the things I really like about doing a Beach Boy channel is they've been around for so long that it gives me an opportunity to talk about pop culture from many different eras. Recently, we've talked about the early 70s, the early 60s, the 2010s, but one era we haven't talked about much until recently when I talked with Giggins and David Beard is the 1980s. And for this summer, I've been planning a big deep dive into the year 1986, which will be coming up soon. We'll talk about pop culture in 1986, plus the recordings the Beach Boys released that year and what they were up to in the fabled year of 1986. I hope you'll enjoy that. As I say, that'll be coming up in a few weeks. I still want to get to 1973 and the Holland album in the fall. I'd also like to do a deep dive into 1969 to follow up 1968, which we did last summer, talk about 2020, the Breakaway single, and I've got a wildly off-topic idea for the last week of the year, which I think and I hope you will really find fun, so stay tuned for that. It's a ways off, but I'm already planning it. Meanwhile, I'd love to hear your comments on this. We'll follow up with some more of the comments and looking at some of the information that's come in next week. Till then, have a great week. Please hit like and subscribe. I look forward to your comments on this as well. Thanks for watching. Bye.